just to say a wee bit about, I'm Shaun Harkin. I'm a People Before Profit Councillor here in Derry. Myself and Emma McCann were elected last May, and we've been trying to cause mayhem since then in the council. And People Before Profit are a 32 county party. We have councillors in Derry, Dublin, other parts of the south, and we've got 3 TDs and Jerry Carroll's our MLA in Stormont. And we take very seriously the effort to build a 32 county party on the vision of James Connolly, a 32 county socialist party with a vision of socialist Ireland, or more traditionally a workers' republic. So I'll talk a bit about our strategy right now in terms of the coronavirus crisis and how that connects with our campaign for the end partition and for a united socialist Ireland. So the coronavirus, I think, has changed everything, because it's thrown the status quo, or the established order, up into the air. People have had their lives completely interrupted. All the normal things that we do are no longer possible, and normality's been ended. So it's kind of like a strike, but it's even bigger than that, because obviously our fate and the fate of many of our loved ones is threatened, and we don't really know what the outcome will be. So I think that what we would have been talking about 2 weeks ago, I think, is very different, because we're ourselves just at the start of trying to grapple with what this means in terms of a perspective and a strategy. We're already acting on a perspective in a knee-jerk kind of way, and a strategy in a knee-jerk kind of way, but this is probably something that will drag on for months, and it has huge health repercussions and consequences. But we all already know it's going to be an economic crisis, maybe the biggest one we will have seen in our lifetimes, and it'll have geopolitical implications as well. As we know, there's a battle between the US and China over who's responsible and how that's going to play out. And every global crisis manifests itself locally in some way. And I think that our local manifestation of this crisis is obviously the threat posed by the coronavirus, but also in the fact that on this small island, we've had 2 strategies to try and combat the crisis. Along with people in Scotland, we're dealing with a laggard approach of the Westminster Tories, who I think have botched this and may cost many, many lives in Ireland and across the water. So Stormont followed, unfortunately, the strategy that was laid out by Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson, and have really slavishly followed that. On the day that Stormont made a united announcement with the 5 executive parties, Sinn Féin and the DUP, all agreeing that they were going to act in accordance with what was coming out of Westminster. The next day, Sinn Féin had done a U-turn on that and said that they wanted to go and implement the same strategy that was in the south, or at least to have an all-Ireland strategy. And we've been campaigning from the beginning for an all-Ireland strategy on the basis that it's fundamentally impractical to have 2 different strategies. And Derry, as people probably know, is a border county. So we back into Donegal, and thousands of people from Derry live in Donegal. Their children go to school in Derry, and they work in Derry, and their lives are very much cross-border, because their grandparents live here, and they have bought houses, very close to Derry, because it's 5 minutes from here. So it's totally impractical to have schools and colleges and creches and pubs and everything closed in Donegal, and then have all those things open in Derry when people's lives go back and forward across the border. So it's angering, it's frustrating, and we've been campaigning against that. Now, in the council, we you know, just to give you an idea of the kind of things we do, but Eamon and I have campaigned. We campaigned for alignment with the South, which wasn't to say that what Varadkar and the Dáil was doing was perfect, because in many ways it's imperfect, but they were taking more drastic action than Westminster were. So we called for our local council to more or less implement the same strategy as the South, and to be aligned with Donegal. And you know, people in the DUP, people in the UUP, people in the Alliance Party all thought that that was the right approach. They said, we agree. We think that that it makes sense to have one strategy for Ireland, because they can see the consequences of having two divergent strategies when you are when your lives are very much cross-border. And so sometimes the practical argument for a united Ireland will be the way that many people will be won over. And this could be one of those things where we will see as the scale of the crisis plays out and the response and what it all means. But it may have a huge set of repercussions for the debate on a united Ireland, because we really should have one integrated public health strategy for everyone here. You know, a lot of people from Derry go to Dublin. People, it's, you know, to fly out of there. So the idea that a state, that the South could protect itself when people from the North were, you know, going in and out, makes no health sense. So that's just one of the more immediate ways in which the partition can have a potentially disastrous impact on all the people of the island, and where it becomes a practical necessity to have one strategy. So, you know, I think that discussion will continue, and we will continue to push on for it. I mean, there's a massive inadequacy of ventilators, both north and south. And I think as we go from one demand to the next, the demand for as many ventilators as possible will grow, as people understand that the more ventilators, the more likely people will survive. And it doesn't matter what age you are. You know, you need a ventilator if you become very sick. And in a place like Derry, where people from Donegal access Altnagelvin Hospital for cancer treatment, and this is actually part of an integrated approach in terms of the health services, it becomes practical as well that there would be an integrated approach for ventilator access as well. So, you know, we're in the midst of all this. We're campaigning around it. People Before Profit are actually having a live public meeting tonight on Facebook about our 32 county strategy with Richard Boyd Barrett, our TD, Fiona Ferguson, a councillor in Belfast, and Conor Reddy, who is in public health, will be speaking tonight about what we are trying to do. So, you know, that's what's happening now. In terms of what Pete had suggested, that I talk a bit about politics pre and post Brexit, and I think obviously Brexit's had a huge impact on politics, especially in the north. The vast majority of people in the north of Ireland voted to remain in the EU, overwhelmingly in places like Derry and West Belfast, nearly 80%, but it was a majority across the north. I think that people mostly voted for that because of the fear of being that the only institution that would have a sway here would be Westminster. There is deep distrust, obviously, of the Tories and of Westminster. I think people will be familiar with the reasons for that. So a lot of people didn't want to follow the Tories or the right wing out of the EU. And there wasn't really a lot of discussion about the EU, to be quite honest. It was more about the implications for the Irish economy and whether or not a hard border would return. So in that context, we campaigned very hard on the idea that if the Irish people, north and south, rejected the return to any kind of hard border, there couldn't be a return to a hard border, and that it wasn't in the gift of the Dáil, Stormont, Westminster, or the EU in Brussels to attempt to impose a hard border. If people were willing to mobilise with people power in large numbers across the island and block a hard border, then it couldn't be implemented. And I think that that was made very, very, very clear. But I think that the Brexit and the fallout from it has had a huge impact on the discussion about ending partition. It's not the only factor, but it has sharpened and deepened it. Prior to Brexit, there had been and there was the beginning of a development of cross-border movements. I think you could see that with the women's rights movement, where there was a tremendous amount of solidarity among campaigners for repeal in the South, repeal the Eighth Amendment so women could have the right to choose. And that solidarity was very much returned in the North as women campaigned for abortion to be decriminalised. So a lot of people came, we campaigned in the South, and people came to the North to be part of the campaigns and the rallies for the right to choose. And that was one example of where there was the beginning of a kind of all Ireland consciousness around a particular campaign or movement. And that's true on a number of other issues as well. You know, housing, there's a housing crisis on both sides of the border where far too few people can access a house or rents are far too high. So there's many, many examples of where there's been developments of cross-border movements. There's the beginning of that in the labour movement. Some of these are not as developed as in other places, but that was a positive that was developing. There's also the fact that we were approaching the anniversary of partition and the foundation of the two states, and that is still, coming upon us, and there'll be divergent ways in which people mark those, obviously. And then there was also the fact that demographically, the demographics in the North are changing, so that there is, and this is a very crude way to measure the potential for a united Ireland, and wouldn't make it inevitable in any way, but the number of nationalists will soon, or people deemed to be nationalists or from a nationalist background, will soon be the largest in the North. So these were things that were already in play as we came up to the Brexit. Post-Brexit, I think because of the threat of a hard border, many people who were not thinking about the national question or partition now think about it, and it's become much more part of their consciousness. And there's been, there is discussions now about what a future Ireland would look like. So in many ways, the discussion about an Ireland free of partition has already begun, and that's been part of the last wave of elections. I think for the last 2 or 3 years, it's been an element in all the campaigning by all the parties. All the parties have something to say now about the constitutional issue and about what kind of future Ireland they're for, or why they're against United Ireland and are for maintaining the union. So this is very much a live issue, and the issue of a border poll has become something that's widely discussed now. Unionism has kind of had to confront the issue that this is something they're going to have to contend with, and there's been demands for a border poll to be called within the next 5 years. For our position, we are for a border poll, and we support the call to have a border poll in the next 5 years. We actually said if there was any attempt to impose a hard border during the out of as a result of Brexit. We were before having one immediately in order to stop a hard border from being put up. But I think that the issue of a border poll is a live issue, and that we are going to be campaigning and pushing for a border poll. That's something we've supported locally in councils. It's something we've called for in the south and in the north. And we will be developing a strategy to push forward the campaign to actually have a referendum on ending partition. So we think getting rid of partition would be a good thing in and of itself, to end the reactionary legacy of partition in Ireland and the division of two states. As James Connolly said, it would lead to a reaction on both sides of the border that would last for generations, and that's certainly be true. And it held back the development of all sorts of progressive campaigns and movements, whether in the south or in the north. And that's why in the north now and in the south, women are only getting the right to choose. That has a lot to do with the way in which partition blocked the development of progressive movements and weakened the labour movement and strengthened the elites. So a border poll, even though more people are in support of it, is not an inevitability. And if there was a border poll, despite the growing consciousness around a new Ireland, a win or an end in partition would be by no means inevitable. So I think the campaign for a border poll will have to continue. It's perhaps true that the fallout from Brexit and the coronavirus may add to that, but ultimately it'll be in the gift of the British government to decide if there will be a referendum here. So we're going to have to push and campaign and make our case very, very hard. We've already been campaigning, in a sense, on the basis that we want to see this happen. So we are campaigning as People Before Profit for what we call a socialist Ireland, an Ireland that can be far more equal, an Ireland, as I was saying, that would be part of the vision that James Connolly laid out, of working class people, having a society that is run in their interests, where the right of capital and capitalism isn't allowed to run riot over people's lives. So we think the campaign for a more equal Ireland and a socialist Ireland won't just be an add-on. We think it's going to be absolutely crucial to winning a border poll, because the British establishment and unionism, and even though unionism is much weaker than it was 40 or 50 years ago, or even 20 years ago, it still will be able to mobilise an argument and have a tremendous influence over sections of the population. The British establishment, along with for example, the DUP, will campaign very, very hard and throw the kitchen sink at the argument around a border poll. And it'll be many of the same arguments that people witnessed in Scotland. You're gonna lose your pension. You're gonna lose your National Health Service. You will lose your welfare system, and you will be worse off. And that this will be a dangerous place to be a Protestant in. That crudely would be some of the arguments that we're likely to hear, with all sorts of threats as well from sections of loyalism who will be in opposition to any democratic outcome. And they've already made that clear that they will campaign like they did back in 1912 for when Home Rule was posed. And that means they're willing to reject democracy and use violence to block a united Ireland. And that is fear for people when they see meetings like that, getting hundreds of people to them, during the second half of last year. So we think to win a border poll, we have to convince people in the north that it's a good idea and people in the south. And the best way to do that is to convince the vast majority of people that their lives will improve and be better in a united Ireland. So in the north, our objective has to be to convince people from the nationalist, the unionist, and the other, and that's certainly a category that's grown massively in recent years, that their interests will be better served, and that they'll have a more hopeful future in an island that's free of partition, and to convince. I think that for many people from a nationalist background, there's been a long-held aspiration for United Ireland, but that people can be convinced of the economic arguments that it won't benefit them, and that's what the Tories and Unionists will push on. So we have to be able to convince people that a new Ireland will, it'll not be one that is the South today, which is a haven for global corporations and tax dodgers, where people can't buy a house in Dublin, where you can't afford to rent anything but a shoebox, where there's a very weak health system. So we actually have to say we want to. It's not just about the North joining up with the South. It's about creating a new Ireland, and that would mean having a constituent assembly where people would hammer out and develop what we wanted that new Ireland to look like. And so that's, to appeal to the working class in the North and try to win them over to that vision. That means we have to have an appeal to the Protestant working class as well. And I think that vision of an island where a state where workers' interests would come first can certainly win over a section of the Protestant working class, and that's going to be absolutely crucial in this campaign. So there's the argument that is possible, and then there's also campaigns that bring communities together, whether that's over leisure centres, opposing welfare cuts, defending our health service, supporting nurses on strike, supporting civil servants on strike. So that's where we've been doing our political work in terms of our strategy. It's to unite those community struggles, worker struggles, and then make the case that an Ireland, a socialist Ireland, will be of benefit to everybody from a working class background. And obviously, there's different visions for how we could end partition. There's the vision of 1989 and the collapse of the Berlin Wall, where an uprising essentially ends it. And maybe that's more likely now in the context of if a rebellious mood developed out of the response to the coronavirus and economic catastrophe. That's certainly a possibility now that we have to imagine would be possible, that there would be a kind of people power movement across the island. But I wouldn't rule that out. But in terms of what's in front of us right now, a border poll would be the way that you would do it in terms of a vote. So it's not really either or, it's about pursuing both at the same time. Even if a majority of people were convinced we should end partition, that would have to be codified in a vote, and that would be some kind of referendum. And right now that's a border poll. So we want to unite struggles in the North, and then we have to unite those struggles and campaigns in the South. And that's really what we've been attempting to do. So I think that the coronavirus will sharpen all these contradictions. It has already put a huge spotlight on the class bias of our society. I mean, the workers who are now being described as essential and key workers in the North and the South are the workers who've been treated with absolute contempt for the last decade. Minimum wage workers in the community, in the health service, in food transportation, in the civil service. And so there's going to be a big reckoning there, and it's already beginning to happen. I'm sure people seen today 1,000 workers walked out at Moy Park, which is the biggest corporation in the North, striking over the response by the company to the safety guidelines not being followed at work. And this is something that's happening across the North. I mean, all day today I was talking to workers and then calling up their companies and asking to speak to managers about how have you implemented safety guidelines at work, and a lot of them haven't, because they followed the slow lead of Stormont, who are obviously following Westminster. So there's a lot of grievances already about that have a class dimension. So it's not even going to be about it'll all happen at the end of this crisis. It's already started, and of course, the devastation that's been wrought on the health service for the last 20 years, that will become visible as the surge hits in the north and in the south, unless we dodge a bullet. And I would prefer that we dodge the bullet somehow. So I hope that that's given you some sense of kind of where politics stand amid the coronavirus crisis, the response to Brexit. The other thing I should say is that the elections in the north and the south were a huge shake-up for the political establishment, and the coronavirus for the time being has kept them in power. But they recorded the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael recorded their lowest ever vote in the south, and obviously Sinn Féin had a massive electoral success, and they're very much Sinn Féin are very much in opposition in the south. They're not the most radical part of the opposition, and that's why people voted for them. They voted for Sinn Féin, and interestingly, the vast majority of places where Sinn Féin did well, People Before Profit were either second or third in terms of people's preferences. So that tells you a lot about the dynamic in the south, where voter loyalties are a lot less hardened than in the north, where people have been through the tremendous struggle of the troubles, and there's a core vote for particular parties. So the one exit poll that was done in the south was on the border poll, and 81% of Sinn Féin voters were in favour of a border poll in the next 5 years, and it was 80% for People Before Profit voters. So that just gives you an idea of Brexit was not a main issue in the southern elections, but it's clear that there's been that issue of the border poll ending partition has developed amongst layers of people who are voting for the radical left, or who are voting for an end to the cycle of the establishment political parties. So these are all things that were getting discussed a lot before the coronavirus broke out. But I'm sure they'll all come back in a more powerful way as everything is played through. So I'll just stop there, and hopefully that will have addressed some of the questions or things people wanted.